My name's Rick Dale. I restore things. I can restore anything you can possibly imagine. We rip things apart and bring them back to their natural state. The process that takes is a really big process. It takes a lot more time than you possibly would think.
Have time?
I don't.
Well, maybe I won't have time later. Maybe I'll have a headache later. Okay? Thanks.
I got a headache right now.
Right now, someone is scrolling past a photo of Rick Dale stamped with the word tragedy. They're getting his story completely wrong. The story usually goes that his business failed, his career quietly ended, and he simply vanished from view. But almost every version leaves out the most important chapter. While the world thought Rick had faded away, he was making a decision that would change the course of his life. What was that decision? And why has he waited until now to tell the truth? Join us as Rick Dale finally breaks the news. What they're not telling you about Rick Dale. Of the many versions of Rick Dale circulating online, one video ages him past 67, more than a decade older than he actually is. Another hints at a tragic accident inside his old shop, never naming it or sourcing it, because no such accident was ever reported. A third hands him a wife named Haley, a marriage that never happened to him at all. It happened to his son. These weren't small exaggerations drifting through fan pages. They were fully invented details, repeated often enough to start sounding like fact. But before any of that noise existed, before a single fake headline got written, there was a real story nobody bothered to check first. It starts decades earlier, with a 9-year-old kid and a broken bicycle his father pulled out of a dumpster. Money was tight in the Dale household, and new gifts weren't something the family could count on. So when Rick's father handed him that busted, rusted-out frame, it became a lesson. If he wanted a working bike, he was going to have to build one himself. When Rick was 13, the family relocated from Newport Beach to Boulder City, Nevada, where his father's garage doubled as a classroom. Restoration wasn't a business yet. It was a shared family pastime, with Rick, his father, and his younger brother Ron working side by side on everything from race cars to gas pumps, long before any of it had a name or a storefront. He did. And something clicked in him that never turned off. By 15, he had moved on from bicycles to motorcycles and cars, pulling apart engines that older mechanics wouldn't touch, chasing the exact moment when something broken started working again. His father, a mechanic and amateur racer, had planted the instinct without ever meaning to start a career. Rick just kept following it, one wrecked object at a time, for the next 3 decades. By the early 1980s, restoration had become his living, not just his hobby. He opened Rick's Restorations in Las Vegas, a shop that specialized in things nobody else wanted to deal with. Rusted vending machines, gutted gas pumps, motorcycles that hadn't run in decades. There was no glamour in it yet. There was just Rick, a small crew, and an endless supply of broken Americana rolling through the door. The turning point came through a pawn shop, not a casting call. Rick Harrison, owner of the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop and star of the new History Channel series Pawn Stars, needed someone who could tell him whether a wrecked antique was actually worth anything, and then bring it back to life if it was. Rick became that guy, appearing in 10 episodes and restoring everything from vending machines to barber chairs for Harrison's customers. One of those jobs became local legend. When Rick Harrison wanted a fully restored 1957 Chevy as a surprise 75th birthday gift for his father, he brought the project to Rick's shop, and Rick delivered it, finished in time for the party. That kind of job is what turned a working relationship into the trust that eventually built an entire show around him. Harrison came away impressed enough to call him one of the most reliable craftsmen he'd ever worked with. That reputation didn't stay contained to someone else's show for long. Producers approached Rick with an idea. Give him his own series, built entirely around his shop. He wasn't sold on it at first. In his mind, gas pumps and vending machines weren't enough to fill an entire season, let alone 6. He was wrong, and by 2010, American Restoration had proven it, premiering on the History Channel and pulling in an average of 2.9 million viewers a week across its run. One episode, built around restoring a Coca-Cola cooler into a working Dodger dog stand for legendary manager Tommy Lasorda, drew 6.5 million viewers alone, the highest-rated episode the show ever aired. The shop became a family operation in every sense. Kelly Dale, Rick's wife since 1994, ran the business side, handling payroll, budgets, and the customers who wanted more than just a fixed jukebox. Rick's teenage son, Tyler, worked the floor since he was 2 years old, slowly earning his father's trust, despite Rick's constant worry that the kid was too relaxed for his own good. Rick's brother Ron worked as the shop's picker, hunting down forgotten treasures across Nevada at his own unhurried pace. Even Kelly's son from a previous relationship, Brettley Otterman, found his footing there, turning the grunt work nobody else wanted, sandblasting and paint stripping, into a genuine skill. Celebrities started showing up too. Musician Billy Joel brought in a vintage motorcycle that reminded him of the one he rode as a teenager. Jason Mraz arrived with his father to restore a sign that had belonged to his grandfather. Funk legend George Clinton showed up with a flood-damaged piano that held 4 decades of songwriting. For 6 seasons, in 126 episodes broadcast across 87 countries, Rick Dale's small Las Vegas shop had become appointment television for restoration fans worldwide. Nobody watching in 2015 could have guessed how quickly all of it would disappear. So what actually happened the night the cameras stopped rolling? The night the shop went quiet. By the end of season 6, cracks had started forming that viewers couldn't see on screen. Ratings, strong for years, had begun to slide, as they eventually do for almost any long-running reality format. Behind the scenes, tension was building too. Producers controlled which customers appeared, negotiated the prices for every restoration, and shaped the story around Rick's shop in ways he had less and less say over. IMDb reviewers and fans discussing the show in real time on forums like TiVo Community made the same complaint repeatedly. The later seasons had grown softer, more scripted, and less focused on the actual restoration work that had made the show worth watching in the first place. Something had to give, and when season 7 arrived, it did. History Channel rebooted American Restoration entirely, dropping Rick's restorations as the focus and replacing it with 5 separate shops scattered across the country. Rick wasn't in the new lineup. Neither were Tyler, Ron, Kelly, or Brettley. The show fans had followed for 6 years, simply moved on without them. And neither Rick nor the network offered a clear public explanation for why. What followed wasn't total silence, even though that's the version most retellings settle on. Rick posted a video not long after the news broke, visibly emotional at times, barely holding back tears, thanking fans for 6 seasons of support. But the message carried an edge underneath the gratitude. He pointed viewers toward the show's official website and encouraged them to leave their complaints there directly. A quiet but unmistakable nudge for fans to push back on his behalf. He never explained the reasoning himself. History Channel never explained it either. And once that video ended, the explanations stopped coming from either side. That gap between the visible emotion and the missing explanation is exactly where the wilder stories took root. Viewers speculating in real time on forums floated theories ranging from a straightforward ratings decline to a falling out over creative control, with one popular theory suggesting Rick had simply refused to re-sign under terms that gave him less say over his own shop. Nobody outside the small circle involved ever confirmed which version, if any, was the full truth. But none of those real, human theories was dramatic enough for what came later. Years later, a different kind of story began to spread. One built less on forum speculation and more on manufactured shock. One persistent rumor claimed a tragic accident inside Rick's restorations had forced the show's ending, though no such incident was ever documented, and no report of anyone being hurt or killed during production has ever surfaced anywhere. Another version aged Rick more than a decade past his real birth date of December 13, 1970, pushing him into his late 60s on screen when he was, in reality, only in his 50s. A third version handed Rick a wife who didn't belong to him at all, describing a 2022 marriage to a woman named Haley, when that marriage actually belonged to his son Tyler, not to Rick. None of it needed to be true. It only needed to be dramatic enough to survive one scroll of a thumb, built on top of a real, unresolved gap that Rick himself had left open by choosing not to explain his side. So, if the ratings decline was real, and the creative dispute was real, and the tearful goodbye video was real, what happened next, once the cameras actually stopped rolling for good? While everyone assumed the worst. While rumors were busy writing him a tragic ending, Rick was standing in a completely different kind of workshop, learning machines that had nothing to do with the wrenches and welding torches that made him famous. Rick and Kelly didn't retreat after the cameras left. They pivoted, hard, into something almost nobody expected from a man known for rust and elbow grease: laser fabrication. Together they built My Best Font Forward, a business specializing in custom laser-cut metal art and embroidery, powered by precision equipment like the full-spectrum laser PS-48. It was analog restoration's near opposite, trading grease and grit for clean digital cuts, and Kelly ran much of the daily operation herself. The same steady hand that had kept Rick's restorations organized for years, now steering an entirely different kind of shop. The business wasn't a hobby dressed up to look busy. It offered custom laser-cut signs and wall art, embroidery for corporate branding, and a $25 a month subscription called Create from a Box, shipping DIY sign-making materials to customers who wanted to try it themselves. Rick and Kelly still showed up in person too, running a booth at SEMA in Las Vegas and the Mega Speed Custom Car and Truck Show in Toronto, staying visible to the same crowd that used to watch them on television. Rick also turned to writing, publishing a book called Classic Soda Machines for the same collectors who used to watch him restore the real thing on television every week. By the time he wrote it in 2014, his name had already become synonymous with Coca-Cola machine restoration. More than 30 years of bringing the same red and white coolers back to life, one machine at a time, long before any camera ever showed up to film it. These new businesses didn't need an audience. They needed the instinct Rick had relied on his whole career. Find the thing everyone else walked past and make people care about it again. Kelly built something of her own too. Alongside the laser business, she became a licensed real estate agent working in both Nevada and Arizona, eventually closing more than $14 million in sales, turning the same car show appearances into client connections with collectors who needed garages big enough for what they owned. Two careers now ran in parallel, hers and his, both built quietly. both without a camera crew documenting any of it. He never fully stepped away from the world that made him recognizable either. Rick kept making appearances at automotive and restoration events, commanding fees that, by 2025 and 2026, climbed as high as $25,000 for a single corporate gathering. His estimated net worth settled somewhere between $2 and $3.5 million. Built from television earnings, his ongoing businesses, and years of steady, unglamorous work, most of his old audience never saw happening. $25,000 appearance fees and a net worth climbing past $2 million describe a man who kept working steadily, just somewhere the cameras had stopped looking. By 2026, Rick and Kelly had pushed even further, splitting their time between Las Vegas and Tulum, Mexico, where they began opening a barbecue restaurant, blending American cooking with local Mexican flavors. It was, in almost every way, the same instinct that built Rick's restorations decades earlier. Take two things that don't obviously belong together and combine them into something people want to come back for. Kelly worked the project alongside him, just as she always had, more than 30 years into a partnership that had outlasted the television show that made them both recognizable strangers to millions of people. The rest of the family kept building too, quietly, the way Rick had. Tyler grew from the sometimes lazy teenager viewers watched on the show into a genuine fabricator in his own right. Marrying interior designer Haley Dale in 2022, the same marriage a Stranger's article had mistakenly handed to his father years later. Brettly turned his sandblasting skills into CleanWorks mobile media blasting, a business that had grown to 3 operating rigs across the Las Vegas Valley by 2026. Ron, Rick's brother, settled into a slower rhythm in Boulder City, Nevada, building custom bicycles as a hobby, admitting he still missed the travel and energy of the show's early years. The Dale family simply stopped performing for an audience and kept building anyway. New businesses, new cities, new reasons to get up early. Which raised an obvious question nobody chasing the tragedy angle ever seemed to ask. If the truth was sitting right there, verifiable in a handful of searches, why did Rick let a sadder, false version of his story spread for years without correcting it? Why he never fought back? He had chances to correct the record properly, not just once in an emotional goodbye video, but for years afterward, as the fabricated age, the invented accident, and the borrowed marriage kept circulating further from the truth. A single interview or a short video could have shut all 3 down in a single afternoon. Instead, after that first emotional message, urging fans to take their complaints straight to the network, Rick mostly let the silence sit. He resurfaced occasionally, restoring items on his own terms and telling followers, in his own way, that he hadn't disappeared for good. But a full, public correction of the record never came. This wasn't the first time Rick had let something go quietly. Back in 1993, personal circumstances forced him to shut Rick's restorations down entirely once before, years before History Channel ever came calling. He rebuilt it from nothing. Walking away without a fight wasn't new territory for him. It was a pattern he'd lived through before the cameras ever showed up, and one he'd lived through again once they left. Part of the answer sits in what Rick actually did once the cameras left. He didn't chase a return to network television. He just kept restoring things, first quietly under the Rick's Restorations name, then eventually through the laser business with Kelly. Fame had arrived because millions of people found that process satisfying to watch, not because Rick set out chasing an audience in the first place. Once the show ended, that same instinct carried him somewhere else entirely. The work continued, The audience wasn't required for it to matter anymore. There's a simpler, more human reason, too. Correcting internet rumors is its own kind of full-time job, and Rick had already built one new business, then a second, then started a third. 3 states and 1 country away from where his television career began. Spending years chasing down every fabricated headline about his age or his marriage would have meant reacting to strangers instead of building anything real. He chose to keep building instead, while the loudest version of his story kept getting rewritten by people who had never met him. The quieter, true version of his story kept unfolding on schedule. A laser-cut sign shipped out, a family heirloom brought back to life, a plate of barbecue served in Tulum. A boy got handed a broken bicycle at 9 years old and was told to fix it himself. He spent the next 5 decades doing exactly that. One object, one business, one reinvention at a time, whether or not anyone happened to be filming. When the cameras finally left for good, he didn't need them back badly enough to fight for the record. He just kept working and let the noise around him say whatever it wanted to say. The tragedy the internet invented never needed correcting from his end, because it was never true to begin with. The real story, hiding in plain sight the entire time, turned out to be better anyway. He never needed fame to keep building a life worth talking about. Rumors had aged him 12 years past his real birthday, invented an accident that was never reported, and handed him a marriage that actually belonged to his son. All of it dissolves the moment you look closely at what Rick Dale was actually doing with his time while everyone assumed the worst. He hadn't vanished. He'd just stopped needing an audience to keep working. And the question is, what that silence cost him, if anything, that we'll never fully know. Do you think creators who spread fake tragedy stories for views should be held responsible? Or is it on viewers to fact-check before they share? Is it still okay to enjoy a tragedy story once you know it's fake? Or does that make you part of the problem? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.